Hello. Hello. Snowy New Mexico. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Wow. I'm looking for hot Los Angeles. Hello, welcome. Well, I'm sure it's beautiful where you are in snowy New Mexico. But last winter it was so cold in Los Angeles that I said this winter I was going to spend in Florida, but I guess I'm not. Oh, maybe Palm Springs with Jill. Hi, Jill. No, me? Am I okay? I just started sneezing when I came up here. I'm in my son's music studio, and I just started sneezing. It smells like there's perfume or something in here, so that's probably what. No, I'm very happy actually. I am, even though I didn't swim today. I don't swim on Wednesdays because it makes me too tired. So I go to the beach in the morning and then I do yoga. And I love to swim, but not on Wednesdays because then I would be too tired to teach the class. Hi, Fran. How are you? So I hope everybody's having a good week. I'm going to sneeze in 1 minute. There's something up here that's making me sneeze. I don't know what, but I'm sure I will make it through the class. Whoa. Excuse me. If I thought my Wi-Fi would work better downstairs, I would go downstairs, but I don't think it does. Anybody know anything about Wi-Fi? I still haven't gotten on my computer for Facebook, so. Okay. For anybody just tuning in, I'm fine. I'm having some kind of allergy reaction to something in this room. So we have today is a chock full day. There's many, many things besides the beautiful teaching on Lecha, the parsha of the week. I want to say a few other things first. Hi, Sherry. I'm going to repeatedly say I'm not sick. I'm just having an allergy reaction to something in this room. Whoa. It's very strong. I'm just going to look around and see what it could be. Okay, we're going to start and we'll see how it goes. If Richard Katz, whoa, hi, how are you? That's so nice. I love seeing all these old Jody. Really, Sherry, thank you. I love seeing old friends, even though I don't see you, but I feel you. It's so amazing that even though I can't see you, I can just feel that vibe through looking at myself, basically. Oh, that's so nice. Wow, that's so nice. Hi, Richard. Really nice. Okay, we're going to start because there's a lot to learn tonight. Hi, Gail. Yeah, I feel fine. It's just something's in this room. Okay. So I want to dedicate the class tonight to a few people. First, I would like to dedicate the class to a wonderful woman who, I'm going to tell you a story about her. Her name was Susie. I don't know her Hebrew name, and today was her yurt site, and it must be at least maybe 25 years ago. In the late 80s, I don't know how long ago the 80s were. How long ago were the 80s? Hi, Shira. Wow. That's my name also. My Hebrew name is also Shira. So I met Susie I spoke at, there was a women's feminist conference here run by Rabbi Lori Geller in the 1980s somewhere, and I was one of the speakers at that conference, and somebody gave my name to this woman, Susie, because she wanted to talk to a Orthodox woman, and she had a question to ask me. And she told me that she was a psychologist and that she was writing a novel, and she wanted to know what was said under a chuppah. What were the words that were said under a chuppah? So I said, 1 minute, and I went to get a prayer book. Thank you, Jill. And I went to get a prayer book, and I opened it up, and I said, under the chuppah, the man says, and I read what he says under the chuppah, after the rabbi, when he puts the ring on the woman's finger. And she said to me, and what does the woman say? And I said, she says nothing. And then her voice got like ice, and she went, like, nothing. And I said, yes, that's correct. If you want to come over and talk about it, you can come right now. And she came over, and she never left. She came over, and for 3 years, she came every Friday, and she chopped and peeled my vegetables for all my guests, and she was, Hamadina, wow, hi. This is really old-time night. So nice. Thank you so much for coming. It's so... Now, Hamadina worked with me in Sfat, in the holy city of Sfat. One summer, I've met all these absolutely fabulous, fabulous women that we worked together for many summers, and I'm lucky enough that some of them live in LA or near LA, or they come visit me or keep in touch. So this woman, Susie, she came, and she hadn't studied anything in Judaism ever. She had been married to somebody who was not Jewish, and she had had a child. And when the child was 4 years old, she gave the child to the father because she thought she could never be a good mother. Really, she thought he would be better off with the father. And when her child was 8 years old, her child stopped talking to her. He was so angry, I guess, that she had given him over, and the father moved to Europe, and she really had no contact with him. She wrote him, he wouldn't respond. Once a year, the father insisted that he call her. And that was their relationship. And slowly, as she became more involved, hi Elaine, in her Judaism, and really got deeply interested and spiritually really awakened, it became very important to her about this relationship with her son, her Jewish son, and she really didn't have a relationship with him. And she, after learning with me for about 3 years, she went to Minnesota to study with Rabbi Manis Freeman, and she was very drawn to the spirituality of the Judaism. But there were many things in observant Judaism that she had a lot of struggle with and a lot of issues with, and I said, explore everything, go everywhere. But she kept coming back. And she decided that she would go to Israel. And she went to, yeah, that's right. Yehudi took her. We went one Yontiv, I think, took her right into the crowd. So it was her yurtzeit today, Yehudis. And so she went to New York because her father was ill. And during the time that her father was ill, she went a lot to Crown Heights, and she went to 770, and she became friends with many people there. And her depth of her Judaism just grew and grew, but her struggle with issues that she didn't feel comfortable with, she never found peace with. But she was very committed to keep growing spiritually, and she decided to go to Israel. And she once said to me, I know that I don't know if I can really go because everybody smokes cigarettes and they don't stand in line and they push. And I said, yeah, you're right. Everybody smokes cigarettes and they don't stand in line and they push to get on buses, but I think it's quite worth it. And she went. And she was very taken, and she went deeper and deeper, and her struggles never resolved themselves, the issues that bothered her, but she saw more uplifting and more benefit in really pursuing it than in holding strong to what certain beliefs were that she had. And then fortunately, and she was very into health and hiking and good eating. She was a vegetarian from the time she was young, so kosher wasn't a problem. And I remember when she didn't want to give up shellfish. You know, that was like, she didn't eat meat at all, no chicken, no meat, but she loved shellfish. And then she came over to my house one day when she was helping me chop and peel, and she said she just saw a special by Jacques Cousteau. I'm sure I'm not saying it correct for all my French friends. And on shellfish and how they eat the garbage at the bottom of the sea, and she's never going to eat shellfish again. And from that moment on, she was totally kosher. So she went to Israel, and in Israel, she found out that she had ovarian cancer, and she became sicker and sicker. And one of the things that happened is I did get to see her. She came to America to visit her mother at one point when she was, hi Laura, when she was quite sick, because her mother was old and she knew her mother would never be able to visit Israel. And she was actually very sick at that time. And I flew in from Los Angeles to New York to visit her. And so she told me at that time that her son, who she had been estranged with for his whole entire life, came to Israel to take care of her. And they reunited, and for this last 6 months of her life, her son took care of her. And she said to me at one point that getting this illness that brought her back her son, she wouldn't have traded it for anything in the world. And so she was a woman who was into growth and struggle, and was a wonderful friend, and was one of the first people that helped me cook and chop and peel, and was one of my helpers. And from then on, for all these years, up until this time when COVID hit and I stopped having 60 guests, I always had a Friday helper, Friday morning. And Susie really was the one who set the tone for that to happen for me. So I just wanted to say that today is her yahrzeit, which was the 10th in the month of Cheshvan. And right now we're actually in the yahrzeit of our Mama Rachel Imeinu. So I want to say a few things about Mama Rachel before we go on with the Parsha of the week. So I'm going to give over a teaching from Rabbi Ginsburg, and also I attended today on Facebook, due to my daughter Hindela texting me to quickly go on, a beautiful woman's programming for about 2 hours of teachers speaking about Rachel, Mama Rachel. And so if anybody wants to listen to the whole program, you can go on Facebook to the site of Shlomo Katz. His name is Shlomo Katz, and look up Inspiration from Mama Rachel, and you'll be able to listen to this whole program. It was really absolutely beautiful, with I think 4 women teachers and a musician, and really talking about the heart and essence of Rachel. So I'm going to do a small teaching from Rabbi Ginsburg, and then from one of the women who spoke today at the conference, and her name is Shoshana Judelman, I think. I never heard her speak before, and she was just inspirational. So today is the 11th day of the month of Heshvan, and it could be called Jewish Mother's Day. Now, since I can't ask you to raise your hands, I don't know how many of you have been at Kever Rachel, but Kever Rachel is the burial place of our mother Rachel, who was married to Yaakov. And it's in a place called Beit Lechem, which is right at the edge of Jerusalem. And it's been a place traditionally for everybody to come and to pray and to open their hearts and cry with tears. And there's so many stories about Mama Rachel. So I want to just give a little insight into who she was. So it says that the day of her passing is also the 41st day of the new year. And the numerical value of the word mother, im, in Hebrew is, guess what, 41. So in the book of Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, we read about how Yaakov leaves the land of Israel, and he goes to Haran, and there he meets his cousin Rachel, and they fall in love. And it says, and Yaakov loved Rachel. And looks like it's love at first sight, which happens. So Lavan was Rachel's father, and he gave his eldest daughter, Leah, to Yaakov first as a bride. And it says that Leah had the majority of the children of the 12 tribes, and the tribe of the Levites, which were the priests, and the tribe of the kings, which were from Judah, all came from Leah. And today, most Jews are descendants of Leah and not Rachel, because Rachel's descendants were exiled by the Assyrians, and they were part of the northern kingdom that was driven away and have not yet returned to Israel. But Rachel is called the mainstay of Yaakov's home. And the prophet Jeremiah promises her in God's name, and the children will return to their border. And the Hebrew word for border, which is the word gevul, equals 41, which is the value of mother. The same, nothing is by chance. So what do we learn from the love of Yaakov for Rachel? So it says that in our connection to God, when we are fulfilling Torah and mitzvahs, that sometimes it comes naturally. There are things that we really gravitate to, or things that are very meaningful to us. So some of the things are natural, and other things we have to invest a lot of effort and a lot of force to achieve these same things. So it says that if we only do what we feel, like we feel good about lighting Shabbos candles, we feel good about giving tzedakah, but we might not feel good about keeping kosher, for example, whatever. It says that we have to make an effort to see what God is asking of us and to really raise ourselves to that level. And we don't want our personalities and we don't want our desires to overtake us and to lead us into a place of total chaos. So it says, what is the foundation of Judaism? The foundation of Judaism is the accepting of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. And I think we've talked about this concept in other classes, and we certainly are always going to talk about it. And it's called Kabbalah's Ol, wearing the yoke of heaven. Just like you have an oxen when they're yoked and they only go in the straight direction, the direction because they don't see to the right or to the left, wearing the yoke of heaven means going straight forward. And sometimes we need this in order to guide us. And it says, though, on a deeper level inside our souls, inside the essence of our souls, and this is going to relate to learning about Avraham today also, that our true Jewish essence is concealed. But this desire, the godly soul, the essence of a Jew wants to be connected to God, to pray to God, to study his Torah, to perform commandments, to perform the mitzvahs. So it says the natural connection with God, the secret of this concealed Jewish nature, which is the natural connection with God, is what the love of Yaakov, of Jacob for Rachel represents. It says she was beautiful of form and appearance. And Yaakov felt that she was his life partner and soulmate, and he connected to her from his deepest nature. But for us, that nature, that part of us is concealed. And everyday reality and different hardships, like Lavan, like the problem that Lavan, Rachel's father, made for Yaakov, creates confusion, and sometimes it can obscure the great love that we have for God. So in order for our true nature to be revealed, for that true essence to be revealed, that we need the complete redemption. That's what we're waiting for. Because we feel it's natural to eat and drink and live, but sometimes it does not feel natural to pursue the sanctity and the purity with Torah and prayer. Some of that, we have to push ourselves. We have to find ways to motivate ourselves to go in that direction. So it says Rachel is buried on the road. She's not buried in Hebron in the Marat Machpelah with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, and Leah. She's buried by herself on the road in Beit Lechem. And she does not find comfort until the last of her children return to their borders. And what does it mean to return to the border? Returning to the land of Israel, where we're supposed to be. And we're supposed to live on that level of being in the kingdom of Israel. This is our natural place. But it also means on a deeper level, returning to that place deep inside our soul, where our true Jewish nature lies. And then we will be, like Rachel was, beautiful of form and beautiful in appearance when we come into the land of Israel in this way. So one of the things I learned from this teacher, Shoshana, I think Judelman, I know I'm not pronouncing her name correctly today, that one of the things she taught, and if you go on this beautiful symposium, you'll hear her complete teaching. But she said that in terms of talking about Rachel, she says the things that we value are things we have to pray for. So Yaakov had children, and Rachel wanted him to pray with her and for her, but he guided her to dig deeper inside herself, to daven, to pray for those things that she wanted, that she desired from that depth of place inside of herself. And it says that if she had a blockage, and then that blockage is removed, when she davens, then she's not the same person. That davening and the removal of that blockage brings her to a different level, brings her to a level of being a different person. And it says Rachel died on the way. So being on the way, working at something, draws down the blessings. It doesn't mean we don't have the blessings if they're not right in our hand, but working on them gives us a way to draw them down into this world. And there's a pasuk, a quote, it says, we plant in tears, and in happiness and joy we see the fruits of our labor. So serious prayer involves serious effort. And when we go to the place of Rachel, when we are privileged again to be at Kever Rachel, the burial place of Rachel, you'll see everybody comes there with such sincerity of prayer. I know this week was my daughter Hindela's birthday, and she went to Kever Rachel, and Kever Rachel is actually closed because they don't want people to gather at different places, like inside the Machpelah, it's closed also. But she went outside, and then the guards that were there, making sure it stays closed and nobody goes in, opened the doors so people could stand at the doorway and at least for a few minutes be near the tomb and pray there. So we don't always immediately get answers to our prayers. And another indication of her being buried on the way, it was a very big thing. It was very important. And we don't always appreciate the effort. We're looking for the result. But there is a lot in the effort getting there. And it says Rachel's prayer, she wanted so badly to have children that she had to put forth a certain energy, and gives us the ability for us to put forth that energy when we want something, when we need something. And sometimes that block that's there is in the way for us to really be able to put in that effort, extra effort. That Rachel never gave up. She davened from very deep inside herself. And it says that the yearnings that we have become the vessels for the actions. And in that act of desiring, there's power and there is energy within that act of desiring. So it goes on to say that how do we get closer to God? That every effort counts. So Shoshana brought down a little quote from the Tanya, from chapter 27, that it's speaking about a person who has put in a tremendous amount of work into themselves, and they're not where they want to be. Let's say you want to reach a certain level of prayer. When you're praying, you want it to be significant, meaningful, and you put in so much effort and you don't feel that you're there yet. But it says that the Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, said, don't let your heart be troubled by this. That even if you spend your entire life going over and asking and fighting and praying for the same thing, maybe that's what you were supposed to be doing. Maybe that effort is what you were created for, to work on being on the way. Being on the way is a path. It's a derech, and it's a way to be connected. So we can't be discouraged when we're on the way and we haven't yet arrived. It's something very significant. So it says that there's the path of the purely righteous that can take darkness and make it into light, transform it into light. But then there's the average us. And we're constantly struggling. We're struggling with this, and then we're struggling with that, and then we're struggling with this. So it says that work is precious to God. Just the effort that we're putting in is precious to God. And it says the fact that Rachel is buried on the way is to remind us of that on the way is very important, that she's with us, that she's crying with us. And the Maharal says she is like a magnet, drawing us to her closer and drawing us closer to God. And when you go, you're just drawn to Kever Rachel. If whoever's been there, and I see many people probably have been there. Another thing that we learn from Rachel, this is from the Midrash Tanchuma. It says that because she kept silent, she merited to have two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, that were higher than all the other tribes. So when did she keep silent? It says the Zohar talks about it, that she could have gone to Yaakov after her father planned to switch her with Leah, to marry Leah to Yaakov. She could have gone to Yaakov and told him it was Leah that was going to be there and not her. But she didn't say a word, not one word. And God said, because of her silence, he said, I will remember you. And we have those genes inside us. We have that strength inside us. And she knew the qualities, her virtues were the qualities of patience and silence, because so many good things happened from it later on. And it says that when the Jews were being exiled and they were being taken out of Jerusalem in chains, it says she jumped out of her grave and said to God, I gave up so much. Why are you sending us into exile? Why are you sending us into Gullus? Why are we going down in chains? And she stopped him and she said that I gave up everything. I kept quiet. Why is this happening to our people? Why are you doing this? And she never was at peace. She was weeping for her children. And she said, I'm not going to settle for this. I'm not going to settle for anything but redemption. And God said, my daughter, wipe your tears from your eyes. Because of you, I am going to bring the Jews back to Israel. And we also know that other people were the center of her life. And how do we see that? We see that in that she gave her beloved to her sister, and she put someone else before her. So we have to think today of people, we're in a very unique situation, and some of us are with other people, and some of us have families, and some of us are alone. And we have to really be keeping in mind people that are alone, and we have to exercise our spiritual muscles. We have to make phone calls. We have to maybe send food to somebody. We have to look around and see what's needed in our community. You know, we just have to exercise those muscles to care about people and to see who is alone and to see what we personally can do, because everything we learn has to be brought down into the physical. It can't be something that we're just exercising our brain, you know, so that we know that Rachel reached out, that she's waiting for us to return, and she's waiting for all of us to return. And we have to reach out to others, and we have to really see what we can do to bring holiness and light into the world. And the Holy Eish Kodesh said, every effort of ours to share more Torah, to say a good word, to say good Shabbos, to bring light to somebody else, builds more bricks in the third temple. And this is what we're waiting for. We're waiting for that building of the third temple. So I want to, before going on to Abraham, I want to just tell a personal story. I think I've told it before, but I'm going to tell it again. My Kever Rachel, it's one of my only Kever Rachel stories. And I also want to say that until recently, Miriam Rhodes, who lives in Israel, every week we were going to, when I was there, it's a we, but otherwise it was a she, would take people there every Wednesday night, like tonight. It's Wednesday night is my traditional night to learn. And they would go, and first they would pray for maybe a half hour at the tomb of Rachel, and then they would go downstairs with a bottle of wine and some music and have a farbrengen and really learn a little something and then sing and dance. So hopefully we can end the evening with singing and dancing and being there. So my story takes place, it's two stories, but I'm only going to tell one of the two stories. But I have and the story happened, my daughter Aura, if she's still on, waved to me before, said hello. So when Aura was 16 months old, so now she's 38. So that was quite a while ago. For any math genius that wants to write in how many years ago that was. But I went to Israel with her, and I have a very dear friend who happens to live here in Los Angeles now. And she wanted me to go with her to Kever Rachel, and we were going to pray for her to get married, for her to meet her soulmate and get married. And so I left Aura behind with a wonderful babysitter. I had a young girl who babysat for me 24 hours a day. And we left at like 5 a.m. because we wanted to get there before the tour buses got there. Now, Kever Rachel, for anybody who's gone recently, looks very different than it looked then. So in those days, it was that beautiful pastoral scene with that beautiful building with the rounded top and the grounds around it and a tree, and it was small. And when you would go into Kever Rachel, you would go in one door. There was like an antechamber, then you'd go in one door, and in front of you, across from you, this way would be the tomb of Rachel. And then there was an outdoor, and you go out the outdoor. They were very good at traffic going in and going out. So we got there very early, and we got there, and I'm sure people have seen those red strings that some people wear on their arms for protection. So we were there with a very special red string. It's a story for another time. It's a whole story in itself. But we got the red string, which was blessed by a very big tzaddik, righteous person, in the 1920s in Tiberias. And we borrowed it. We borrowed it from the woman who it was given to when she was 12 years old. And now she was close to 80 and had just returned to Israel to live there. So, and also today, if you would go to Kever Rachel, there's a separation between men and women, so you can only be by half of the kever. But at that time, there was no separation. It was just one room. So I went first, and I went around, and the custom is you kind of attach the red string at one corner of the tomb, and then you walk around the tomb 7 times saying blessings, saying psalms. So I walked around 7 times saying my psalms, and then I was psalmed out, and I went to sit in the back of the room, and my friend was now going to go around and pray. And we were there when it was totally empty. And then tourists started to come, and one tour group after another started to come, and big tour groups. And the tour guides, for the ones that spoke English, met from many countries, and would say, you know, here we are at Kever Rachel, the tomb of Rachel. It's the burial place of Rachel. It's a place for people to come to pray, and women in particular, to pray for children, marriage, health, livelihood, peace in Israel. And then they pointed to my friend who was praying, walking around the tomb and saying, and look, here we have one of these ancient Jewish women at prayer. And they would point her out. Group after group did this, and eventually there were more of those ancient Jewish women at prayer praying at the kever. And the tour guides would point this out to their Jewish tourist groups as if they were in China, visiting a Chinese temple, watching the natives pray, and as if it had nothing to do with the Jews that were coming to visit Kever Rachel. So this went on for about 45 minutes. Group after group came in, and finally another group comes in, and the tour guide says the same thing. Here we are at Kever Rachel. It's a place traditionally for women to pray for children and health and marriage and livelihood. And then he pointed out all those ancient Jewish women at prayer, and he said, okay, let's go. And they went out the outdoor. And then about 5, and I'm just sitting there watching, you know, everything that's going on. And about 5 minutes passed, and one woman from that group came in, and she stood at the outdoor, and she looked at the tomb of Rachel, and then she walked out, and then she came back in, and she walked around that tomb 7 times. And I sat there watching her, and I was weeping watching her, because I saw her soul at that moment come out. I saw her soul be drawn in by Mama Rachel, be drawn into that Jewish essence, to who she really was, and to be able to make that connection. It was so overwhelmingly powerful. So I want to give us all a blessing on my L'chaim, on my water. I don't even have a fancy cup today. That we all can go together as this beautiful class, that we're all learning together, that we can all go and we can all be praying, standing there at the grave of Rachel, and being able to be praying there and praying for each other and praying for the world. And we're close to peace. We are. So we have to hold on. And we're going to learn about Avraham. This is the 3rd week. We started with Bereshis. We started with the Parsha of Bereshis, which is in the beginning. Then we came to Noach, and what do we learn from Noach? We have to have peace and tranquility, and we have to go forth in the land. And now we're going to learn about Avraham, and the Parsha is called Lecha. So it says that most people know the basic storyline of Avraham, that when he was 3 years old, he smashed his father was an idol maker, and he smashed his father's idols. And I'm not going to go into the details of the dramatic, when his father, who smashed my idols? And he goes, they did. They got in a fight. And he goes, well, they can't fight. And he goes, my point exactly. So, and then he was thrown into a furnace. We'll go into that in a minute, of one of his tests, and he was saved by God. But it says all of these things are not in the written Torah. These are in the Midrashim. The Torah mentions Avraham only briefly at the end of Parshas Noach, And he says that he was born and that he married, and he accompanied his father on his journey from Ur towards Canaan. But then the focus was on talking about Terach and not on Avraham. It's only in Parshas Lecha, when Avraham was 75 years old, that it says, go out of your land, your native country, and your father's house. And now we begin to learn. And I'm going to do quite a few teachings on this, from different sources. Right now I'm teaching from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's teaching. And whenever it goes off, it means somebody's calling me. So I had to turn it off. Yes, I am waiting for my computer expert to come over and show me how to put this on my computer. Okay, so it says, before he received the command to leave his father's house, he already attained a high level. He already recognized God. He recognized God when he was 3 years old. And then he began to grow stronger in his faith. And he was willing to sacrifice his life for God. He jumped into a fiery furnace. And a miracle was performed he was saved by a miracle. So this was his striving, his approach to reach God. The command that he received from God, go out of your land, began a new and a deeper relationship with God. And we learn from our sages that a person who observes a mitzvah, a commandment, because they are commanded to, is greater than one who does it on their own without being commanded. So the word mitzvah and the word tetzavta means together. They serve they have the same root. When a person fulfills a divine command because they have been commanded to fulfill it, the act connects that person to God and all the infinity of God. If the person was to perform the same task without being commanded, it would be a good deed, but it wouldn't have that same connection to God. So now God is saying, go out. So Avraham was commanded to travel beyond his limited frame of reference and to establish an unlimited connection to God. And there is a little footnote, and it says that previously, Avram's service was more inner-directed, focused on his own spiritual discovery, his own growth, and his journey to Eretz Yisrael began a phase in which he spread it to others, in which he worked with others, because one of the things about doing a mitzvah is it enables a person to go beyond their own individual limits. So it gave him the strength to go beyond that. And it says that our connection to God is not really dependent on our love and understanding. It can come from the initiative of God requesting something from us. So the word lech means to proceed, like in the beginning of a journey. And it says that Avraham was continuing on his way and he was steadily progressing southward. And what was southward? The direction of Jerusalem, the place where God's presence is the most manifest. And it says when a person wants to make spiritual progress, they have to leave the place they were in behind and move forward. But if you depend on your own strength and your own power, then you will be limited, because we can only go so far as our own understanding. We don't have the ability to go past that. But when a person is guided by God, like Avraham was guided by God, there are no limits. Sky's the limit, as they say. So Torah and mitzvahs can take a person beyond their natural horizons. And God tells Abraham to proceed to the land which I will show you, without saying a destination. And I want to say that for the last 2 years, I have a wonderful, wonderful neighbor who took me to Maui in December to a spiritual conference there that was put on by a person named Ram Dass. And there were many, many spiritual presenters there. And the first year that I was there were 9 spiritual presenters, and 8 of them were Jewish. Without exaggeration, 8 of them were Jewish. And it was interesting to me because mostly in this whole time, in both years that I was there, they mostly talked about their experiences in kind of making a connection to God 50 years before when they first went to India, but there was not a presentation of being directed or that connection in their current life. It was actually a little boring, to tell you the truth, because I also had those same experiences before I came back to my Jewish roots, and to incorporate Torah and mitzvahs in one's life that are requested by God and gives you a push and a vision to take you beyond your natural, a natural kind of understanding that opens gates that I think one doesn't have if you are a Jewish soul without Torah and mitzvahs. Highly recommended, Torah and mitzvahs. This is a plug. So God tells Abraham to proceed to the land I will show you. Just keep going. Go forward. Go forward. I just have to tell you something funny. That when I was in India, and we were driving through the country, and with 4 maps, but each map was different. So you would say to somebody who didn't speak English, and you'd say, "Is this the direction?" And they'd always say, "Yes, yes." So no matter what direction, you were always going wrong, because no matter what direction you pointed in, it was always whatever direction you asked, yes, that's the direction. So the expression "I will show you" in Hebrew can also be used to say "I will reveal you." Through your journey to Eretz Yisrael, Avraham's true self was revealed to him. And that's also in this expression Lecha, which really means go to yourself, go to your essence. And he was willing to put his individualization, so to speak, aside and respond to God's command that there would be more of a direct connection between God and the creation. And he unleashed a tremendous potential, because it says every Jewish soul is actually, mamish, a part of God. And this is the essence of our spiritual journey, to transcend our ordinary ways of thinking and to tap into our godly core. So I just want to say about another footnote that there was a difference in the mitzvahs that were performed by our forefathers and our 3 fathers and 4 mothers, but our forefathers, they're all called our forefathers. And the mitzvahs that were performed before the giving of the Torah and those that were performed after the giving of the Torah. Because the ones that were performed before the giving of the Torah did not affect the material world, and that the mitzvahs we've performed today in this world, 2020, infuse material existence with holiness. It's such a beautiful concept that we can have an effect on material existence to the extent that any article that we use for a mitzvah becomes consecrated. For instance, a mezuzah. If we put up a mezuzah and the mezuzah goes bad, or it rots, it rips, it's been out in the rain or something, you can't just toss it. It has to be treated with respect and buried and taken care of with proper respect, because there is a remnant of holiness that stays attached to that materiality. So, so let's continue. So it says, in the course of a person's spiritual travels, a person comes to situations like Rachel Imenu, where there's a struggle, and also a person might even fall. But even that is divine providence, that because the purpose of everything we're doing is to go forward. Just like Avraham kept going south to Jerusalem, we're to go forward, and when we fall, what happens? We get up. And it says that there is an expression that we descend, that there's a descent in order to ascend. So when a person is faced with this type of challenge, there are two reasons given. One is to bring out the power of one's own soul. So when one faces a fundamental challenge, it becomes necessary to pull on your spiritual resources. Remember last week I told a story of a woman that was lost in the woods, and she was totally fearful, and she closed her eyes, and she said she wasn't going to open them until that fear went away. And she was lost in the woods for 17 days. But that first night, she just closed her eyes, and till she wasn't fearful anymore. And she drew on that the whole entire time that she was there. So that's step one, that sometimes we have to call on our spiritual resources to succeed. And the other reason is that when a person overcomes a challenge, there are sparks of holiness, sparks of godliness that are contained within either different places, different things in the world. And it says all existence is maintained by God's creative energy, the energy that is hidden within the world's materiality. And because of this hiddenness, we don't see it. So we have challenges. And by overcoming these challenges, we reveal the true godly nature of existence. And Avraham's spiritual journey contains such challenges that what happened? He finally makes it to Eretz Israel, and he was forced to descend to Egypt. And Egypt was called the nakedness of the land. And the very name Mitzrayim, Egypt, is related to the word Metzurim, Metzer, which means boundaries, narrowness, or limitations. And even that descent into Egypt brought Avraham blessing. It says he left Egypt very rich in cattle, in silver and gold, and this wealth came from spiritual effort. He elevated some of the sparks of godliness that were invested in the country. And I just want to read you something by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who should have a refuah shlema. He's undergoing an illness, and he should really, in the merit of all his teachings and his inspiration to people, he should really be completely cured. So he was talking about Abraham, and I thought this was so interesting. He said he became the most influential person in the world, actually, and he's claimed as the spiritual ancestor for 2.3 billion Christians, 1.8 billion Muslims, and 14 million Jews. He ruled no empire. He commanded no great army, no miracles, no prophecy. He was the supreme example of influence without power. And why? It says because he was prepared to be different. He was called Ha'ivri, the Hebrew, because all the world was on one side and he was on the other. And to quote Rabbi Sachs, he said, dead fish go with the flow and live fish swim against the current. I thought that was just so, says it so much. So one of the hallmarks of Avraham's personal development and anyone's personal development is the ability to inspire others. And he certainly had that ability. And it says he called in the name of the God. It says, do not say he called, but that he had others call. That he didn't only call God to himself, but he inspired others. He included others in that journey. And that is the message of today. And that is the message of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, to, make another, to bring in more, share the beauty of Torah. Share another word of Torah. Like we learned from the Esha Kodesh, it says that every Torah shared is another building block in building the Beis Hamikdash and building the third holy temple. So also, this is reflected in the changing of the name from Avram to Avraham. So Rashi explains to us that Avram merely means the father of Aram, while Avraham alludes to the Hebrew words meaning father of many nations, that he was given the potential to inspire and influence all the nations of the world to strive towards spiritual goals. And just like what Jonathan Sacks said, look how many billions of people claim him as their ancestor or as their inspiration. So also significantly, and there's so much on this, I really want to inspire people to go on different websites, go on different Torah sites. Chabad.org is a great one. Torah Anytime is a great one. Rabbi Ginsburg's site. To just delve into these concepts in a deeper way. I mean, we're only really just touching the surface of them. So it says that Avram was given his name in connection with the mitzvah of circumcision. And there is so much, and there's so many levels to circumcision. There's the circumcision that a male undergoes. There's the concept of circumcising the heart, which is one of my favorite teachings of the levels of how one circumcises the heart. And it says that circumcision is an act which affects the most basic physical aspect and demonstrates that the spiritual quest is not an attempt to escape the world, but rather an attempt to refine it. Because why? Because circumcision is a covenant in the flesh and endows the physical body with sanctity. So when it says, go out of your land, your native country, your father's house, it means abandon one's ordinary way of thinking. And this was addressed to Avraham, and his habits and his way of thinking were already on a high plane. Remember, we start the chapter of Lecha when he's 75 years old. He already has made progress in this area, but he's instructed to proceed higher, a higher level, reach your potential and go to a higher level. And every single person is capable of doing that. One of the things when I first left, I lived in India, as many of you know, for many years. And then I left for a month with a round trip ticket to go back to India, because I had a spiritual teacher who told me that Judaism was the highest spiritual path in the world, and also the hardest to find the spirituality, but he thought I should learn about being a Jew. So I thought, okay, I'll go to Israel from India. I got a round trip ticket, and I'll go for a month, and I'll just study everything there is. I'll learn the whole thing, and then I'll come back and live the rest of my life in India. So you can guess what. If you guess what happens, you get a free Shabbos dinner. Okay. So it says that the promise of Eretz Yisrael is mentioned in connection with circumcision, because circumcision reflects the unification of the spiritual and the physical in one person. And the relationship between the Jews and Eretz Yisrael is a unification of spirituality and physicality in the world at large. So the attainment of the physical Eretz Yisrael, we don't only want the spiritual, we want the physical Eretz Yisrael was the culmination of Avraham's spiritual journey. And this journey began with the command Lech, Lecha, and it is ongoing. We're told the same thing, Lech, Lecha. We're all being told that. And we have to be exceeding our spiritual limitations. Each of us, we can't, there's no resting. So I want to go on to a teaching that I learned with my wonderful teacher, Rebbetzin Fei Yamini. And she was talking about this, go out of our land, the place you were born in, to your father's house, which I will show you. And it says it is not, this command, Lech Lecha, is not a preparation. It's the first thing that God told Abraham. It was a complete entity in itself, Lech Lecha. And it says that this is talked about, this pasuk is talked about by so many commentaries and so many people. Where are you going? Don't say where you're coming. And the question is, where are you going to? We normally don't say where we're coming from in order to say we're going to. We don't say we're from a certain place, but here it's talking about that. So it says, go to the land I will show you. There has to be a daily self-awareness in order to get where you're going. You have to make a conscious decision to leave where you are. So the land includes the place where you were born. Once you've gone out of the land, you've already gone out of the place where you were born. So the land, so why doesn't it just say, go to the land I will show you, that each and every Jew has a role to play? And it's your job to bring light into the world, just like in the story of Bereshit, that the first day light was created. And it says there were no people, there was nothing to shine the light on, there was no one to use the light. But it was created on the first day because just like an architect has a plan to build a building, God had a plan for the light of the world. So we have to have a plan. So when God says that there will be light, he had a plan. So we have a plan, and we are a soul in a body. And God created an infrastructure and set a course in nature for man to master the world and to discover the light, that godly light, and to reveal that godly light. We are born with different talents and different abilities, and to uplift the world, to reveal the godliness in the world, take the world higher. We have a role. We must generate godly light, each of us. You know, you can't leave it to, oh, that person can do it better. Oh, that person is not shy. That person can talk to people. No, it's up to you. It's up to every single person. Everybody is essential. Every person. Maybe one person can talk to 10 people and you can talk to one person. It doesn't matter. This is not a contest. It's just we're all moving forward together. And it's a privilege. It really is a privilege to be able to do it. And we have to see it that way. We have to really see that we've been given a gift as Jews to bring light and holiness into the world. And no matter what the obstacles are, that we must do it. And it means everybody. It means absolutely everybody. So we want to elevate this lower world. It needs to be elevated to higher. And it's talking about that we leave the birthplace, we leave the house of your father. Your land means your natural attributes. You're going to leave what comes to you naturally, and you're going to strive for more. And we know that little Abraham, at 3 years old, realized there was a creator in the world. And the way you conduct yourself is your birthplace and the house of your father. It brought up a certain way that you were from your land, from the nature of your birth. And you're going forward. You're leaving how you were raised. You're maturing and you're going forward because you're born with a certain nature, and then you can go past it. I heard a class that was given by Rabbi Raskin, and he was talking about an experiment that was done. He was using this as an example for this point. And he was talking about an experiment that was done with sharks. There were sharks in some big tank somewhere, and they were swimming freely, you know, having little shark playtime. And then they put a plexiglass wall down into the shark tank. And on the other side of the wall, they put Spanish mackerel, which now you know is one of the shark's favorite foods, Spanish mackerel. But they couldn't get to the Spanish mackerel because there was this plexiglass wall. And every time they would try to get to them, they would bang into the wall until they stopped banging into the wall. And they just stayed in that part of the tank. And then they removed the Spanish mackerel, and then they removed the plexiglass wall. And the sharks no longer went through the whole tank. They stayed in their part of the tank that they got used to. And he's using this as an example, is that we can go beyond what's natural to us. We can go beyond what you think you were given in your childhood and you can't do more. This is what we're being told. We're told to go past that, to go beyond that. God wanted Abraham to go without any preconceived notion and self-care. When it says Lech Lecha, we got to go into ourselves also. We have to go to a very deep level in ourselves and pull out our essence and pull out what's there. That's self-care. That's taking care of the inner self. So God says to Abraham, because you listened to my voice and recognized God, and says he lived 175 years and his years were called complete. So that he was a soul giver. He gave life to the soul of the Jewish people. And we hear a voice every day. It's saying to us, Lech Lecha, do we give ourselves over? Only you know that. I mean, it is very important for everybody to have what's called a mashpia, kind of a spiritual guidance counselor, or I want to say counselor, a guidance person, that you can run things by and see if you're growing in the right way, and run these conflicts by a person, because we need to have a life of spiritual growth, a life of awareness. And we have to see where we were and see what steps we need to go forward. And it says the way you were born and the way you were nurtured, there are layers of self. There's a wholeness that they have, and that we have to complete that wholeness. We have to use our talents. We can't, just say no to them. We have to use our capabilities. We have to use everything. That's what it means to go out of your land. And we have nothing else to do. We're all home. We're not riding in the car, going to movies and shopping malls and restaurants. So, and it says that there's a spiritual journey to get to this level. And what did Avraham do? He took his whole family with him. It wasn't like Noah. Well, I mean, he didn't only take his whole family. He took his whole family, and he took people. When he left Haran, he took lots of people with him. So he had a responsibility for the community. We are responsible. That's one thing I can tell you for sure, that we are responsible. And he and Sarah, their experience was all-inclusive. It was global in a certain sense. And he saw life differently. Like it says, Ha-Ivri, he stood on one side and the world stood on the other, and he acted accordingly. And in that place, when we refer back to Bereshit, let there be light, he was light. It was like a little light bulb, lighting up in the world in all the details of his life. And he made others call on the name of God also. And also we have in this parsha, there's so much in this parsha. I mean, we could talk about it for hours. It says there's the story of Lot, who was his nephew. So what's significant in that story? He said to him, we're family, and if you need me, I will be there. And he lived far away from him, and yet he went there. And that Lot had a connection to him, because why did the people turn against him? They turned against him because he was having guests, and this is why he was attacked. So Avraham traveled to a far place to save him. So sometimes our imperfections are on purpose to travel through them, to go to all possibility, to spend all expenses that we have to really get to a certain place, to help another person. So Avraham had 10 tests, and the 10 tests were to reveal his level of what we call Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, opening the gates, and that it is a privilege and it's an honor to touch that place that goes beyond. And okay, so it says that Avraham had a bris, and it was in his physical flesh that he experienced the will of God, and that we read these parshas, we read Bereshis and Noach and Lecha in the month of Cheshvan that we're in now. When we re-enter, we reinsert ourselves back into the world. There's no longer the holidays. We take from everything that we gained during these holidays and we develop it. We go forward. And it says that when Yaakov returned to Israel, Rachel's husband, he struggled with the angel of Esau and was victorious. It says he was challenged, his Torah was challenged, and we need to lean into our challenges, and we will get to the land. That's what we've been promised. The land I will show you, and it's in order to elevate the world, and we have to shift in the way that we're thinking, and we have to reveal the light that's in the world, that the true beauty of the world is hidden. So let's continue. So it says that names, it's talking about names are not accidents in the Torah. And also the Torah portion, names are a cue to their content, even though sometimes it's just the first word of what's written in the Torah. But nothing is by chance. Everything is by divine providence. So there is so we've been talking a lot about Lecha. Let's continue. So usually it's translated, get out from your country, your birthplace, and your father's home, but it means literally go to yourself. And what does going have the connotation of? Moving forward. You're moving. Your purpose is towards one's creator. And go to yourself, towards your soul's essence. It's so beautiful. Find that essence of your soul and your ultimate purpose for which you were created. And one of the things is we learn from our ancestors and from our Rebbes is to love your fellow Jew, to dig deep into yourself and to pull out that love. And this was the commandment that was given to Avraham, because he was told to go to Israel, and in Israel he was going towards Jerusalem, and he kept going to a deeper degree of holiness. And then we find there was a famine in the land, and he went down to Egypt, and it says that why does this seem to be a reversal of his spiritual journey when he was supposed to be going towards his spiritual fulfillment, and now here's an obstacle, now here's a downturn. So anytime one goes to Egypt is called his spiritual descent, and because it says Abraham went down to Egypt. Why? Because there was a famine in the land of Israel. So that seems to be a concealment of the blessing of God, because God promised Abraham, I will make you a great nation, I will bless you, I will make your name great. And now he reaches the land that God promised him, and now he has to leave and go to Egypt. Like, what is that? So there are many, many different commentators. One says maybe he had to prove himself worthy, maybe he had to go on this mission. But it says that he did not complain. That's one of the things I found very interesting. In the commentary, it said he was not angry and he did not complain. Because sometimes we'll have a challenge and we'll be able to go to that challenge and we'll be able to overcome that challenge, but we might be fetching the whole way that we're doing it. So it says, it was noted that he was not angry and he did not complain. But it says that his mission was not for himself personally. It was to spread the light of God to other people. It was to arouse other people to recognize the one God. So it says the Midrash brings an example about his journeyings, and it says that sometimes you have a spice box and it has to be shaken about to spread its aroma to all the corners of the room. So sometimes that going to different places and finding yourself in different places is like spreading that aroma, gathering those sparks that are hidden in different places of the world and elevating it. So also when Abraham entered Egypt, another hardship happened to him, that his wife Sarah was taken by Pharaoh. And even though he did not touch her, it was a descent from the spiritual course that they had been on. I mean, it must have been quite overwhelming and terrifying. And so it goes on to talk about that Avraham saw Sarah in a different light because he always saw her with spiritual eyes. And now he saw her with the eyes of how the world would see her and that tremendous beauty. And he asked her to say that she was his sister, which we're not going to go into that part of the Torah. But you can look it up on one of those sites that I gave you and learn the details of it. So how is this descent actually an ascent? You know, we know that the soul comes into the body, and it's called a descent, but the only way the soul can elevate is by being in a physical body. And we're not going to go, there is a teaching on that, but there's another thing I want to go over. So we're not going to go into that, but that when a soul comes into the body, it says it has to be forced into a body. Just like when you have, I always think of Cinderella, when you have that shoe that doesn't quite fit and those wicked sisters is trying to force their feet into the shoe. It says a soul needs to be forced to come down, but once it's down here, it's really for its benefit. It's for the ascent of the soul. So it says, it goes on to try to understand why all these things happened to Avraham that appeared to be a descent. And it says the works of the fathers are assigned for the children. That what they do brings about what happens to their children. So I just have to comment. I went on Facebook before, and I see my son Mesh posted something, and he posts that his brother Shmuley, who loves to go to national parks, visited him in Boston, and he was on his way to Acadia National Park in Maine, and he took Mesh with him. Mesh would never have gone on his own, and he took Mesh with him. And they did a very difficult hike, and then there was like another hike to see this most beautiful lake. I mean, if anybody's on Facebook, you see the pictures are gorgeous. So they're hiking to this other lake, and in the middle of nowhere, and no one's there, and all of a sudden a voice rings out and says, "Yep, to Mesh, are you Jewish?" And he looks around because that's his line usually. And there's a couple there, and they're walking, and it's a long story, but he said he saw his tzitzit sticking out, and so Mesh said, "You must be Jewish." And then the person said, "Yes, I was." Many years ago, I was at a young Jewish professionals dinner that you hosted. And so reminded me that when my husband and I went hiking to Yosemite, we hiked 5 miles up to a waterfall. And when we were there, exactly the same story. There was somebody there that had been at a Shabbos in our Chabad many, many years before. So it says here that the merit gives their children the strength to follow their example. So what happened to the father happened to the child. So it says, and in Avraham's wanderings, the subsequent history of the children of Israel was made possible. So we're going to see what that is. Because Avraham went down to Egypt, and it foreshadowed the future Egyptian exile that the Jews would undergo. And also, he left Egypt, and that also foreshadowed the Jews' redemption. And he left weighed down with cattle, silver, and gold. And also, the Israelites left Egypt with great wealth. So also that the Israelites were saved by the behavior of Sarah. It says that that the women of the Egyptian exile were able to keep themselves from being with the Egyptians, and Sarah also had protected herself from Pharaoh. So we can see that his going into Egypt had something to do with the Jews being redeemed in future years from their exile in Egypt. And when it says he was weighed down with cattle and silver and gold, it expresses the way that he was to transform the most secular and heathen things into the service of God. He drew the good. Remember last week, I think, was it last week we talked about taking the good from the bad? Yes, when we were talking about Shabbos and elevating the things that might not have been like in a person's prayer or a person's mitzvahs, the things that might have been just the knock it off variety, not done with intention. When Shabbos comes in, the good can be extracted from it and it can be elevated. So it says that all of these things, the gold and the silver and the cattle, represent elevating sparks in the service of God that were there, and the ascent was implied in the descent. So it says that sometimes these things that happen in our history are not like they're wandering from the path. They're not wandering from the path of the way they should be. It's also these things were supposed to happen. It's a way of shedding the light of God on untouched corners of the world as a preparation for the redemption. So there is a story that there were a group of women. There was a women's convention. Lubavitch has women's conventions for the last, 45, 50 years. And they used to have a winter convention. They still do, but I guess not this winter. A winter convention in different cities. And there was once a convention in Minnesota. So right before Shabbos, the women were going to be leaving, and they were going to be going back to New York, a group of women. But there was a big storm, and the planes weren't flying, and they really wanted to get home. So one of them, they called to the Lubavitcher Rebbe's office for a blessing that they should be able to leave, and saying that they were stuck in Minnesota. And the reply from the Rebbe was, "You're never stuck. There's a divine providence in why you're there. Find out why you're there. Do something." And they went to the malls and they gave out candles and they had a beautiful Shabbos. But everything, it's not like, oh, this is the wrong thing that happened. Everything, even if it's a digression, is on the path. It's on the path to the ascent. So it says that Avraham's removal to Egypt was not an interruption, but part of the command of Lecha, the journey towards self-fulfillment, which was in the service of God. And it was also later the destiny of the children of Israel, and it's our destiny also. It's like in the one thing I have to say that's happened for me during this time of being locked in my environment is the amount of amazing teachers and classes I have been able to connect to, especially from around the world, from different cities. I saw a class tonight with my Makatenis or Bracha, and I never would have been able to attend one of her classes because I'm never going to spend time in that part of New York, and classes in Jerusalem, and classes just anywhere. It's just amazing. And so it might look like a disruption of life, but it's leading to an ascent. It's helping me grow. It's helping me it's enabling me to do this class, this Facebook class, which is going to free me to be able to travel wherever I want, whenever it opens, and always be able to teach my class. That was one thing that always held me back. Well, didn't exactly hold me back, but it kept me from including more trips, is that the people I was teaching and the classes I was having, that I would have to stop, and people weren't so happy that I was stopping them. And now it's opened up another doorway. So I'm saying that we can say it's an interruption, but we have to look at it with different eyes. We have to look at it as how is it helping us to progress? So it says we are preparing for the redemption. Mashiach is coming. It is very clear. And it will be on a higher level than what we could have reached without all of this happening. So it says exile is an integral part of spiritual progress. And this is from the Rebbe. This is a teaching from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It allows us to sanctify the whole world by our actions and not just a small corner of this. And perhaps somebody can say, but how do we see this progress? You know, some people see the world as not growing in holiness, is growing in the opposite. But that is a superficial way to look at the world, that because everything is by divine providence. There's nothing happening without. And even though on the surface it might seem one way, the goal is transformation, the goal is Mashiach, and the world will constantly be elevated and the world will be refined. So I want to do another teaching. I mean, I have like 4 million teachings here, but I'm going to stop at some point. We're not going to get to them all, but I'm really begging you, go on these websites. There is so much to learn. These parshas are so beautiful. I only am touching such a small part of it. And they add so much depth to our life, you know, so much significance to our life. And it certainly is going to be a better choice than to watch what's going on in the world. So it says, we learn in a Mishnah that Avraham was tried by 10 tests. There were 10 tests that were given to him, and that he succeeded in each of the 10 tests. And the first of these, and the most trying, was that of Or Kasdim. So what was the test? It says that he was cast into a fiery furnace because he wouldn't bow to Nimrod, and he wouldn't bow to idolatry, and he was saved from this fiery furnace. And it's not really even mentioned in the Torah. It's mentioned in the commentary in the Mishnah, but it's not literally, as we said before. The first thing that's mentioned really in terms of Avraham is Lecha, when he was 75 years old. So so go forth from your land is applying to the spiritual work, the avoda of every person, on the level of elevation. So we know that there's the elevation from on high downwards, and it relates to the descent of the soul from its sublime level in the higher worlds into a physical body. And then there's the elevation from below upwards, relating to the ascent, which is obviously the superior level, caused by the soul itself and involvement with the body and worldliness. So the soul is coming into the body, and it's coming into the body for an ascent. And the lowly world means the involvement with lowly, mundane matters for the purpose of purifying them of their grossness, of their hiding of the light, and sublimating them to divinity, which in turn affects an ascent for the soul. This is a lot of work. This is very important. And it says the descent of the soul on high into the body involves two opposite concepts. On the one hand, there is the principle of you live against your own will. Means the soul doesn't want to leave. It's basking in holy light. It's having a great time up there. It doesn't want to leave. But it has to. And once it comes into the impurity of the world, it has an ability to elevate the world. And that is the life of the soul in a body that is forced upon the soul. And it says, according to the Zohar, that the soul is hewn from below the throne of glory. And even though it's the lowest aspect of the soul, there is a higher aspect of the soul, which is called, it is pure, and there are more sublime aspects and levels. And the descent of the soul is actually a degradation for the soul. And the previous Rebbe said, prior to this descent, the soul is shown the Garden of Eden and Gehenna, which is the higher world, and then the world of Gehenna, the world of hell, really, in modern English, in order to be made aware of its task in this world. And it says you live against your own will. But on the other hand, in spite of this, the descent is only the way the soul can reach a level superior to its original state, as indicated in a descent for the purpose of an ascent. So I want to just, we're moving away from Lecha, and we're going to another part of the Parsha. That there are practical instructions every week in the Torah. It says, remember we talked about how the Alter Rebbe said, live with the times, and live with the times means live with the Torah teaching of the week. So God gave Avraham 2 children. His first child was Ishmael, and then Isaac. So when he was promised Isaac, he already had this son, Ishmael. And he would have been content, provided that Ishmael would live before you, meaning would conduct himself as he should and pursue the divine way of life. That's like every parent is longing for their child to go in the right way, really. So God said that it is essential you have Isaac, he will be your true joy, and by Isaac shall your seed be called. So Avraham was 99 years old when he was promised Isaac. And for decades, he had served God and experienced many trials. And it says that when he was praying that Ishmael might live before you, he meant that Ishmael might live the sort of life that Avraham would show him, and do so in a way that would bring the kind of joy that Avraham was looking for, the joy of serving God. So the Midrash tells us that Hagar, who was the mother of Ishmael, was a pious woman, and her conduct is compared to the service in the temple. And that is why later on, after Sarah dies, and it says Avraham remarried a woman named Keturah and had sons, and these sons went to the east bearing gifts. Hagar was called Keturah because her deeds were as beautiful and sweet as Keturah, which was incense. And also she had the quality of Mesiras Nefesh, of that self-sacrifice of the soul. And how do we see that? It says that she was the daughter of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and she gave up. He was the ruler of one of the most powerful empires of the time. And she decided to leave the royal palace to become a maidservant in the home of Sarah in order to be a member of the household of Avraham. I mean, okay, that's pretty intense. So it says that there was a basic difference between Ishmael and Isaac. The birth of Ishmael was natural without any divine intervention. And Isaac's birth was miraculous. I mean, Avraham was 99 years old, okay? It was not possible that for them, both Avraham and Sarah, she was 10 years younger than him, so far advanced in age, should give birth to a child. And no one believed it could happen. And he did not regard himself as deserving of God making a miracle for him. Also, there is another difference between Ishmael and Isaac relating to the aspect of circumcision. That because this was the only mitzvah which, before the giving of the Torah, established a special bond with God. So Ishmael was circumcised when he was 13 years old, and he had sufficient reason, meaning reason in understanding, to agree to it. to say yes and to be held accountable for his conduct. And Ishmael used his reason to determine his readiness to enter the covenant with God, and he accepted circumcision. Isaac was circumcised at 8 days old. An infant that young cannot give consent, and he was bound up with God at that early age. And this type of bond can never be dissolved, and it was an eternal covenant. So there are other distinctions between Isaac and Ishmael. It says Isaac had a supernatural, miraculous birth in contrast to Ishmael's natural birth. And Isaac's covenant with God was in a super rational manner, as opposed to Ishmael's covenant, which was based on reason. So normally a child is born and raised under the supervision of their parents and guarded from any type of harm and educated to understand for a proper understanding, which would lead to becoming attached to God. And this was the way of Ishmael. He was raised in the home of Avraham and received an education that guided him that he should be attached to God, that he ought to attach himself to God. But this type of attachment provides no assurances. Why? Because when you make your commitment to God, dependent on reason, dependent on understanding that it's logical, it'll provide the best life for me, we don't know how that person will be affected by the variables of life and what will happen to them in life. And no one can tell the extent of the commitment, whether the commitment is everything, or the commitment is in the few things that make sense to them, and that they're going to live in that way. The things that reason dictates they follow. So it says for Ishmael that when Isaac was born, all rejoiced. And Ishmael said to them, "You are fools. I am the firstborn, and I receive a double portion of the inheritance." And when the two boys went out into the field, Ishmael would take his bow and arrow and pretend to be shooting, but he was really shooting at Isaac to kill him, to take his insurance policy, his inheritance, to claim his inheritance. And that was the reason that Hagar and Ishmael had to leave the home of Avraham at Sarah's insistence, because he was actually trying to kill Isaac. So it says that the existence and the purpose of the Jewish people transcend nature. That there is a transcendent level that we go beyond natural calculations in how we're going to attach to God. God said to Avraham, "True joy can only come from a child whose from the moment of birth onward is in a divine context. A child who is bound up with God from its earliest opportunity, when only 8 days old, and by an eternal covenant." And it says I learned that the godly soul, when a girl is born, is attached immediately at birth. And that soul, when a boy is born, hovers around the boy until the time of circumcision. And that's why circumcision is so important. And I will now make another appeal for circumcision. I'm waiting to hear from a family that live in the middle of nowhere that are going to give birth in a few weeks to a girl and a boy, that the Chai Center where you're going to help make the circumcision and hire a moil that will be able to go travel the 10 hours round trip in order to be able to circumcise this baby. And if anybody would like the merit of participating in this mitzvah of having this child circumcised, this is the right parsha to do it in, to donate in. So you can text me. Okay. It says the religious commitment to Yiddishkeit of such a child is not limited to reason, but is the level of Mesiras Nefesh, total joy. It says that commitment goes beyond reason. That commitment starts at the moment of birth, when the child does not have any understanding and cannot give his consent to the circumcision, and yet he does so. And this is what happened with Isaac. So we go on to say that the Torah is of eternal relevance, and we begin to read the Torah every year from Bereshis, and that the narratives in the Torah give instruction of how we conduct ourselves in our homes, in our societies, in our communities, and for instruction for life in general. So some people think that education should begin when a child has already matured and can understand on their own how to conduct themselves. I hear this all the time. They hope that their children will grasp Yiddishkeit instinctively because they are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But I have to tell you, no, that doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. You know, I remember before answer machines, you know, when you used to answer your own phones all the time. So I remember we had a lot of kids, and people called day and night. You can only imagine calling a rabbi constantly. And it was becoming a little too much. So we got an answer phone. and so we could like either screen the calls. Remember, you could screen your calls, or so I'd hear somebody call on the answer machine, and first of all, they'd have an accent. So you always know when they had an accent, they were a Holocaust survivor. And then they would say, Rabbi, I have to talk to you. I have such a problem. It's of the worst kind. And they're going on. And I'd pick up the phone, and I'd make my husband take the call. And he said, I thought you don't want me to take calls. That's why you have an answer machine, so I could have dinner time with the family and this and that. I said, but I know what it is. It's like when a Holocaust survivor, you hear their voice, and it's a trouble of the worst kind. You know that their child is being involved in an intermarriage, and it's just breaking their heart. So, and what is the first question my husband would always ask them? Did your child have a Jewish education? No, not at all. Not one. No Jewish education. Because instinctively, because they cared, they hoped that their children would care. So we know that that's not true, that we need to educate our children and educate ourselves. How are we going to make the choice to go forward in living a Jewish life if we know nothing about it? You know, it's interesting. I'm always pushing my meditation class because I think meditation is wonderful, and I take this meditation class out of Sfat. You can find it on talorot.org, Talarot. And in the meditation class is a woman who lives in Sfat now, who used to live in LA. And when I see her, like, my heart just fills, because when we first met her and my husband invited her for Shabbos, her response was, "What's that? What's that?" She grew up in New York. She never heard of Shabbos. And today she lives near Sfat. She's been living in Israel maybe 25 years and observing Torah and loving every minute of it. But not given a word of Torah, not any education. And so it's a big thing, and if your kids are grown or you don't have kids, look around. Encourage other Jews. Tell them the importance of Jewish education. So it says that this parsha is coming to say that when we follow our human reason, that it won't lead us necessarily to a bond with God. It sometimes takes this level of what we call Mesiras Nefesh, like the 10 tests that Abraham went through. This level of really squeezing, it's called the squeezing out, the crushing of the soul, the squeezing out of it. You know, that we have to learn and able to do. If we don't learn things, we just won't know how to do them. And it can't be diluted. It has to be the real deal. That I actually saw something that I'm going to share with you that was very disturbing, actually, to me. I won't go into all the things that are disturbing, but I'll go into this one. So I was watching a synagogue on YouTube. I found that there's a lot of services on YouTube from synagogues that are not Orthodox synagogues that will do their services. So this week there was a Friday night service. It was Saturday night. I was looking for a certain class, and because I've watched something from this place before, it's in New York, it popped up. And there was two rabbis and a cantor, and one of the rabbis was a woman, and the cantor was a woman, and the other rabbi was a man. And at the point where they were going to do the candle lighting in the service, they asked the man rabbi to do the blessing and light the candles. And I watched this, I almost in shock, but really, and he, lit the candles, and he did the blessing, and he brought in the light, and he covered his eyes, and I felt robbed. I thought, this is a mitzvah that was given to Sarah, and Sarah passed it on to Rivka, and Rivka passed it on to Rachel and to Leah, and it's come down through all the centuries of all our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers and our great-great-grandmothers, and it's a woman's mitzvah. And there were two women there. It wasn't that there wasn't a woman there. And just seeing that scene, like authentic Jewish education gives us something so deep and so beautiful and so powerful. It's our inheritance. We have this inheritance from Avraham and Sarah, and we've been given these gifts. And we have to know what they are, and we have to know what they mean in our lives. And they add to us, and they're like garments of the soul. We're dressing our soul. So it says that the Jewish people are not governed by natural considerations. That when a child is only even 8 days old, it must already be given this powerful level of Yiddishkeit. You can't let it decide later if it wants to have this or not. And that child is ready to be connected to God with a perpetual bond that will last not 1 year, not 10 years, but for eternity. It will be an eternal covenant. And it says that we have to know, the children and the children in us have to know that we are not subject to natural considerations, that we are descendants of a nation which, since its very inception, did not go according to the fashion. We are descendants of the oldest nation, which is in possession of the oldest doctrine, which is the Torah. And we underwent many years of trials and hardships. And our existence, you could say, is miraculous. And the descendant of such a nation is not subject to any calculations. So it says that we are attached to God by this eternal bond. And we are sure that we will reap true joy in both the spiritual and the physical senses. And in this parsha, we live every day in this parsha with Avraham, who was the first to open the channel of Mesiras Nefesh with Sarah. And this is our inheritance. And even converts to Judaism share this inheritance because they are related to Avraham and Sarah, and they are referred to as the son of Avraham and the son of Sarah, and the daughter of Avraham and the daughter of Sarah. So when Avraham gave us this trait of Mesiras Nefesh, of this ability to reach inside us to the deepest level and overcome our reason, as an inheritance, it says this included all converts as well. And we all have the ability to have Mesiras Nefesh. And it says that the previous Rebbe was saying that Avraham, at the age of 70, was a possessor in full control over his behavior, over his intellect. And even so, he was commanded, Lech, Lecha, to move away, to go deeper. And yet he hadn't yet had his circumcision. And that when he did, it says that all he attained before he received it, and the commandment to circumcise is related to his spiritual strength, that it was given from God above, and it represents what we call the supernal circumcision, meaning that the whole concept that I mentioned before, and we're going to learn one day in detail, which is the circumcision, says, and the eternal your God will circumcise your heart. And it says that when this happens, we draw down the most exalted orot, meaning radiations of light, which transcend the creation and the order of the progression of the creation. And it says that it will connect us to the higher level, which is called the Ein Sof. And this week has to be a happy week because we're going into the next Parsha. And yeah, this week has to be a happy week. No matter what, we have to find the happiness in the week. We have to really connect to happiness. We can't let what's going on in the world pull us down. We must be connected to happiness. So, okay, I think that even though I have many pages left of classes that we can learn, we'll have to save it for another day. So I want to just wish everybody a wonderful week. Thank you so much for coming to the class. It gives me an opportunity to learn and to prepare. And thank you, everybody who said hello. And hi, Linda, because I see your name. I can't say hello to everybody when I'm teaching because I just can't. But I don't always see it. So you can always text me if you want me to call you. You can always call me. And I will be teaching next week. And I'm very excited because next week I'm having some children visiting, older children from New York. My daughter Rivka Sarah is coming to visit and to see my daughter Hanala, and Shmuli's coming, and Barry's coming, and I have wonderful children that live here and give me the proper amount of attention. So, and my dear friend Mimi from Yerushalayim. So I want to wish everybody a beautiful week, and remember today, in the merit of Rachel Imenu, let's reach out to somebody else. Reach out. It doesn't have to be somebody who's alone and lonely, like I suggested before. It could be somebody who's happy who you haven't talked to. Somebody who would be so happy to hear from you. And everybody, really, in the merit of our Mama Rachel, because what do mamas do? I know that one year I hadn't seen my brother for about a year or two. You know, my brother lives in Portland. And I remember having to go because I could hear my mother up in the heavens going, visit your brother, visit your brother. Every mother wants her children to love each other and to get along. So in the merit of today being the Yortzeit of Mama Rachel, that we should all reach out to each other and include us all, and all those who need a blessing for healing should be healed immediately, including the world, and we should have Mashiach. And I should be broadcasting next week from the Holy Land. Okay, so thank you, everybody, and have a beautiful week and a beautiful Shabbos.